subtle insignificance smelled in the air. Nothing special happening as two teenagers, close to the twilight, danced half-naked around each other. Most of their clothes lay on the ground. What was left covering the two young bodies were just rags. It would be obvious to an observer how the clothing came into that state, brutally cut, ripped apart by the hands and lustful bites of two young hearts. No outsider was to be found as they were completely alone, surrounded by a thin mist. As they both swung and revolved around the grass of the desolate park, their feet kicked and smashed the homework received earlier in the day. Holiday's homework, forgotten on the ground, was still untouched. After rotating a complete round and falling onto the humid soil, displaying a sweet laugh, the girl proclaimed, "We could be like this forever, don't you think? The grass, little weeds, and even insects here on the ground, now, have more colors than anything I ever saw in my entire life. It makes me wonder why we can't just be born like this, with this beautiful perception of things." After a short pause, staring at him, she continued, "Hey, I have an idea. Let's run away, beyond these mountains that surround us in this little shithole we call a city. What do you say?" The girl managed to stay her feet perfectly for a while before almost losing control and falling again with a dizzy look on her face. Regaining control over her legs, she approached the boy, not before spinning one more time, smile on face, praising the clouds. He stared transfixed, admiring how her long blonde hair undulated, almost as if it were fluctuating on the air, alive, in perfect admixture to the grayish, smoky tone of the haze. Stunned and clearly confused, he stepped back with a rapid movement and a scared look. She managed to touch his arm, stealthily, with her lousy approach. He felt the warmth of her hand and surrendered to her touch. "What do you say? We could adopt a puppy or rob the zoo's youngest grizzly bear and live in total harmony with nature, up high in the mountains," said the girl, enthusiastically. "Delia, you're already too high." "Yeah? If that's so, what about we make love, here, right now?" she enticed. Instantly the mouth of the boy ran dry, the dryness rapidly expanding to his throat, his heartbeat starting to sound like a tambourine, despite being totally subjugated to the LSD he took earlier. His hormones couldn't say no to this proposal. He had become a prey to the desire, knowing the price that needs to be paid later for wasting unique opportunities. He'd been after this girl for more than a year now and really wanted to lose his virginity to her. After 2 minutes of drooling, one eye open and the other closed due to mild hallucinations and minor itch, he replied, "Right now? Here in the park? What's with this sudden desire?" "Right now, under the rising, barely visible stars. Are you afraid?" she enticed, again. The rising stars that the teen girl spoke of, in her drugged state, appeared more like burning wheels of karma despite the still early evening's time and now thick fog. When the boy looked at the black sky filled with those scrambled luminous pearls, he immediately remembered the images in his parents' books about Eastern religions, mysticism, and secret doctrines in a reflex. Those were the images the boy always found more than a bit of disturbing. Scared, he felt silent, being judged by those unknown forces. The psychological pressure forced him to look at the ground for a while, ashamed and reluctant before looking at the inviting girl. The religious pictures from his memories made him feel like it was some sort of a sacred moment. A benevolent reward for his strength and survival through puberty until now. After one deep breath, his hands started to sweat as he pulled off the rest of his clothes. By the time he was fully naked, she was already lying down, prepared for him. For her, it seemed like ages had passed since she proposed the act. For an instant, he couldn't pull enough courage to lie down with her. He was sweating, confused, and his head was spinning. He stared at her. The girl was rolling on the floor and laughing. She didn't seem to be impatient. As he started to calm down utilizing deep breaths, she started to take on a new appearance. Delia was no longer a girl, she abandoned her human form. She stopped rolling on the grass and looked right into his eyes. What he saw at a first glance were two giant opals transformed into golden almond eyes. Extending both of her arms towards him, "Come here," she said. Without saying a word, he collapsed over her. Her head gleamed like a fluorescent dome, evaporating the undesirable nebular vapor from the surrounding air. Her eyes changed through a variety of colors, stabilizing in a deep tone of purple. The being, whose appearance no longer resembled Delia, had longer hair that extended over 10 feet, resembling tentacles of an octopus. Sparkles encapsulated both their bodies, glowing like the sunshine itself, wrapping them both together in a structure resembling a cocoon. Delia noticed no difference in Jimmy until her gaze lowered to his length. It had come alive, with a snake's head, ruby eyes. It was speaking softly, hissing. Delia wasn't scared. "Jimmy?" she called out. Jimmy glanced at her. "What?" Delia didn't blink as she watched Jimmy through her altered vision. "Take me" was all he got from her. Considering the effects of the lysergic drug, Cordelia began to display a diverse vocabulary with demonstrations of eloquence and romanticism. This was uncommon for Jimmy, who, even though knowing her for long, hadn't seen such behavior by her part. Their first touch was hesitant, despite the lowered inhibitions, but their oversensitive skin added another dimension. Their conversation could only make sense to the two of them. The hissing had to encounter its end. The cocoon was complete, sealed, for they felt the other's pleasure as their own. Two were no more, undergone transmutation into one being, sharing the flesh. Several hours later they woke up, muddy, all over the bugs, grass, weeds and homework, with only the acid flashbacks to explain the past few hours. There were now two beings, completely different and unable to perform the same sort of previous communication. Still all sweaty, with minor headaches, the girl said, "That is actual sex, my real first orgasm. I never reached so high before." Jimmy replied, "That was my first time. I think I'm in love with you, Cordelia. It's hard for me to tell you this, but..." Delia began to laugh loudly, interrupting Jimmy, and said, "My sweet little ex-virgin lover, you have so much to learn. When we had sex, love was everywhere, love was everything. You don't love me, you were just having a nice trip." "We both were, indeed." After listening to this, Jimmy, still confused, masked his state of mind, trying very hard not to confess the fact that he was struggling to drain her attention for over a year now. For anyone in that age, this was a proof enough of love. For him, it was real even before everything that took place in that abandoned playground. At least, that was what he thought. They both agreed to forget the day and just go back home, to transcribing all the trashed homework. Back to normal life. Nor Delia nor Jimmy had permission to reach home late, after dinner, so they had to make a run to reach in time. "Let's go home, I'll escort you," said the boy. Delia put her ragged clothes back on and revealed one dress still clean and undamaged inside her purse. A neat, yellow dress. This made Jimmy doubtful if this was really an all-rebellious act of pure impulse at that moment. He hadn't brought any other clothes with, so he mentally etched a plan to enter his house via his room window. Before starting the run, Jimmy took one more look at Delia, deepening until his insistence to see something unfamiliar faded away. No more octopus-like hair, the glow disappeared, normal hazel eyes and snow-white skin. The only strange thing were the little dots he saw floating in the air, but attributed this to being a collateral effect of the drug and ignored it thereafter. Jimmy knew he was incapable of fulfilling the promise he made to Delia about forgetting the love they made earlier, which she considered as just a nice trip. Delia looked back at him, amused by his innocent expression while he inspected her carefully. "Wake up, Stonehead, we're going to be late," she said, waving her hands in front of his face. "Snap out of it." Clicking her fingers, she added. Jimmy traveled back to the present. She kissed his cheek as a form of compensation and they started to run, together, even though the boy felt alone. More alone than ever. Arriving at her place, Delia hugged the boy. Jimmy felt like he had been used for fun and left on his own until the next time she wants to play with him again. "See you after the holidays, have a good night, Jimbo." "Okay, have a good night. See ya." It started to rain as soon as the girl entered the house. Jimmy walked down the rest of the path alone, drenching him in the tears of nature. Arriving at home, Jimmy picked up the watering can in the garden and started watering the plants, only to remember that it was already raining once he had watered about half the garden. He couldn't stop thinking about what happened that afternoon. The impulse to water the garden was due to the intense love for growing plants he had inherited from his dad. Since his child years, his dad forced this role onto him. Initially, he hated it, but after spending a couple of painful years in the art of doing something he didn't like, a passion gradually started to develop. A taste to tend not to the seeds and plants his dad held so much dear, but the weeds and other anomalies which his father found undesirable or, in his own words, a pain. Nowadays, independently of what his father did, he never could be able to tend the perfect garden, and Jimmy was the culprit for it. Jimmy knew he was the culprit. He gladly considered this an act of rebellion against authority and a very good form of stress relief. After watering and remembering about the rain, the boy proceeded with the plan of climbing up the house to enter his room. He thought for a change of clothes before dinner, starving. He climbs it with ease and enters his room all wet, dripping water on the floor. Ignoring the wetness, he laid down on the bed, just for a brief reflection and relaxation. He briefly remembered his homework for the holidays while staring at the poster on the ceiling. Immensely tired, he fell asleep without even noticing.